This is Group 7's presentation on the effect of urbanization on asthma prevalence and severity. Here is an outline of what our group will be discussing in the following slides. The United Nations estimated that in 2014, of the 233 countries or areas of the world, 63% were more than half urban. Substantial changes in the environment can have major effects on the human immune system and thus the prevalence of asthma. Urbanization has been associated with a heightened risk for asthma, and the prevalence of asthma has increased in recent decades, particularly in developed countries. Accompanying this increase, there has been a dramatic population shift from rural to more urban societies. As you can see in figure 1.1, taken from the 2014 revision of the United Nations World Urbanization Prospects Report, in 2007, there was a shift from predominantly rural living to over 50% of the world's population living in urban areas, and this trend in global urbanization is expected to continue. Urbanization is defined as a population's transition from living in rural areas to living in more urban areas. From 1950 to 2014, there's been a 24% increase in the number of people living in urban areas. Urban planning and sustainable development are key factors in mitigating the negative effects of urbanization on environmental and occupational health and preserving the beneficial factors of living in cities. Asthma is responsible for 10.5 million missed school days among children, 14.2 million lost work days among adults, 14 million doctor's appointments, 1.75 million emergency room visits, and $60 billion in direct and indirect costs each year. So what is asthma and how is it related to urbanization? Asthma is a chronic disease that causes the bronchial tubes that carry air to and from the lungs to become inflamed and narrow, potentially blocking all airflow. An estimated 26 million people in the US have asthma, 1/3 of which are children. The World Health Organization estimates that half of asthma cases are due to genetic factors, and the other half are attributed to factors in the environment. These environmental factors include high exposure to traffic-related air pollution, which is prevalent in urbanized areas. Treatments are available for allergic and non-allergic asthma types. However, there is no cure for this disease, making it ever more necessary to minimize the negative environmental impacts of urbanization. This slide shows a few of the many exposures related to urbanization that can have major impact on the prevalence and severity of asthma. Exposure to elevated levels of ambient air pollutants such as nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and small particulate matter can cause DNA methylation of CpG sites in immune cells, which increases children's risk of developing asthma. Furthermore, the effect of poverty on asthma is compounded by urban living. Studies show that children living in poor urban areas in the United States have an increased risk of morbidity due to asthma in comparison to other low-income children. African American children show the highest rates of increasing diagnosis of asthma in recent years, and despite the increase in access to health services that usually accompany urbanization, the rise in population density negatively affects air quality, ultimately mitigating the positive value of health resources.
So several scientific limitations exist in the research of urbanization and its effects on asthma. For example, it's difficult to fully control for seasonal variations and seasonal effects such as pollen in studies that seek to measure small particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, and carbon monoxide in their relationship to asthma. Although studies found that short-term and long-term exposures to these high levels of ambient air pollutants are associated with methylation, it's possible that other pollutants, dietary exposure, and toxins from the air, water, and other sources may also contribute to DNA methylation. Air pollutants vary by season, and aeroallergens such as ragweed, oak, maple, and Panacea pollen can affect the severity of asthma in pediatric asthma emergency department and clinic visits. Lastly, confounders may exist when looking at race and poverty. For example, unhygienic living conditions, which exist in low-income settings, may contribute to a higher frequency and severity of symptoms of asthma.
There are several challenges to reducing asthma in urban areas. A low socioeconomic status in urban dwellers is a huge challenge. A majority of asthma morbidity is in low-income individuals. Unmanaged asthma can be fatal. Low income can inhibit people from proper treatment, like medications and going to seeing specialists. In an urban low-income areas, it's typically inner city. In inner city, there's a 40% increase in risk of asthma visits to the emergency department, suggesting that there are several cases of unmanaged asthma in inner city urban areas. Determinant of ethnicity and race is another challenge. In a study comparing race, urban living, and poverty, the most prevalent factor for suggesting that for asthma was race, showing that African American individuals had that highest prevalence. And obviously, you cannot change that determinant of race. There's a tough challenge, the fact that there is no cure for asthma. There are several irritants in the air of asthma in urban air pollution, such as chemicals, smokes, and fumes, as well as illnesses and colds and flu from more people being in urban areas. There's also a lack of resources, specifically in new cities. Their allocations and resources are spread thin across several jurisdictions, making it difficult to only mitigate one issue thoroughly, such as air pollution, as well as a lack of efficiency in urban planning, design, and development. Poor design and development can increase harms to the environment as well as decrease the economic growth of an urban area, causing an area to not gain as many resources for their city. There are solutions to improving urban areas. One such is emission control to help decrease the amount of smog and its severity to the air. Emissions testing is a huge thing in Colorado and helps to control that. Efficient urban planning to help increase the productivity of a city and its sustainability and protection of the environment. Implementation of policies, which will be discussed next, in order to help protect the environment and decrease the negative impacts of urbanization. Population control is another one, in order to having family planning services readily available to community members in order to help decrease the overpopulation and overcrowding in urban areas. And private-public partners is a huge one. It helps to increase the innovative support to helping mitigate severe impacts of urbanization. And lastly, technological developments for safe traffic, helping to slow down the roads in order to increase the amount of active transportation, such as biking and walking, is happening in these urban environments.
There have been several policies put into place to improve air quality and therefore reduce asthma. This includes the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act, which is a bipartisan bill first passed in 2005, which grants money to fund projects that have the goal of reducing diesel emissions. Some states have introduced legislation controlling the amount of time school buses are allowed to idle in front of schools, in the hopes of reducing emissions in front of children. Volatile organic compounds are in many aerosol sprays and everyday building materials and can lead to and exacerbate asthma. Regulations are in place to reduce VOCs throughout the country. Many states have indoor and outdoor smoking bans. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development passed a rule banning smoking in public housing. This goes into effect July 31st of this year. Colorado also has specific policies. Colorado requires emissions testing for vehicles in all parts of Boulder, Broomfield, Denver, Douglas, and Jefferson counties, and some parts of Adams. House Bill 11-1275 passed in 2011 and it allows communities to limit idling to 5 minutes within a 60-minute period for large commercial diesel vehicles, with certain exceptions. The Colorado Clean Indoor Air Act bans smoking tobacco in most public indoor areas. It was amended to include marijuana smoke in 2010. The Federal Clean Air Act first passed in 1970 and had major revisions in 1977 and in 1990. It set air quality standards for 6 criteria pollutants. These include particulate matter, ozone, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, and lead. Since the implementation of the Federal Clean Air Act in 1970, the U.S. air pollutant emissions has dropped by 70%.
In addition to asthma, there are several other health factors that are impacted by urbanization. Urbanization is often coupled with the formation of food deserts and food swamps. Residents in these areas have little to no access to nutritious, fresh foods, and oftentimes have very little access to fast food restaurants. They have very easy access to fast food chains, which offer little nutrition value. With higher intakes of saturated fat, sugar, and salt, there's a greater risk for obesity, diabetes, and chronic disease. Research has shown that body mass index and cholesterol levels increase sharply with national income and the degree of urbanization. There are also several aspects of urbanizations that lead to crime. Committing crimes in urbanized areas is simply more feasible. There's also a greater awareness of the income gap between the rich and the poor due to modern media. This leads to feelings of deprivation, which can lead to crime. In some regions where urbanization happens in wealthier areas, a rise in property crime and a decrease in violent crime is seen. Lastly, there are some positive health effects of urbanization. It's found that residents in urban areas compared to rural areas are more physically active and partake in more leisure and recreational time. Physical activity through transportation, such as biking and walking, is also at higher rates in urban areas, whether out of pleasure or necessity.
So can urbanization be a good thing? Yes. Urbanization brings convenience and accessibility to the cities. Typically will provide better education opportunities, better health facilities, and more opportunities for social services. It can also be great for cultural integration. Typically, urban areas have more races, ethnicities, and ages and genders associated with them, considering it to be more of melting pots. And urbanization also brings growth and development to the state and the government, as well as surrounding communities. They growth and develop in economical ways as well as goal-driven ways. Urbanization brings more of the economic growth that can be help with allocating the resources to the areas that are needed across the entire state or across the entire communities, as well as most urban areas and most growing cities are always looking to improve themselves with goals that they set for themselves each year, which is great for developing and bettering the area. And lastly, urbanization brings employment opportunities, although it might mean that more people have to come into the area and there might be more traffic congestion. It really is helping individuals find jobs that are unable to find jobs in more rural or remote communities. We hope you like our presentation.